Hello and welcome to YesterYears Mac games. For today, we're going to have a look at the two PegLegs. These are arcade Galaxian type games that don't really differ from each other all that much. This is the first, and this is the second. The key difference is the roster of foes whizzing around the screen, with only slight changes to the mechanics. PegLeg 2 then is more of a PegLeg type B. More on this one later. Let's start with the first one, written by Sean Ansorge, back in 1994 as ShareWare, a year after his previous game, Hemiroids. What a lovely image that title paints. There's a bit of backstory to the first one. The player has a boring but safe job, until suddenly they don't, being bolted to the Mark Z battalion blaster and sent to clear out conveniently numbered sectors of hostile aliens. There's probably no grounds to complain about the simplicity of that. It's more than some games give you. The ship can be controlled with the keyboard, but mouse movement is where it's at. The game makes heavy use of inertia, the continued movement in whatever direction, at whatever velocity, that the mouse last sent to the game until it's moved again. It's not something that can really be done with the keyboard or controllers, and does take a bit of getting used to, but when one's gotten the hang of it, a player can pull off some pretty complex movements around hazards. It's really satisfying to have navigated out of a tricky situation with controls like this. The hostiles don't take themselves too seriously, there's small spheres that float around aimlessly, this worm squidges from one side to the other, this bounding thing hops around annoyingly on the bottom, these globs home in on the player's Mark Z and burst into smaller blobs when shot, and this thing spews traffic cones everywhere, truly a universal bane. The ships can be powered up by catching these bouncing supply crates. It's best to stop shooting when one gets close, as it's all too easy to blow it up yourself. These will mostly increase the power and frequency of a ship's gun, but can occasionally gift homing bullets called goomas, or provide very powerful bullets on a temporary basis, cause instant destruction of about half the enemies, and the most useful, shielding, enabling the player to charge at whatever is being particularly irksome. As the ship lacks a way to fire any other way than up, I'll usually use a shield to off as many of these horrid things as I can. High scores are achieved in a more traditional way to other space shooters such as Solarian or Maelstrom. In those, it doesn't really matter how far a player gets or how long they play, as the leaderboard tends to be dominated with scores that have matched a big multiplier with a fat bonus. There is a bonus in PegLeg, but it's not overpowered, and there isn't a multiplier to offer immense point gains. The standout high-value moments are these asteroid storms, where a fully powered up gun can smash through them to reveal lovely gold coins, which seem to be worth several thousand each. The game is by no means perfect. While the sound effects are fairly plentiful, I feel a bit of background music wouldn't have been a bad thing, and maybe a slightly wider selection of foes could have made stages a little more varied. Even a palette swap could have achieved this a little bit. The biggest whinge that I have, however, is how the enemies spawn in. I lost so many lives to this. Staying away from the edges then is very much advised, but sometimes it's just not possible, and to lose a life like that when there isn't any other routes to take is the second most aggravating thing. The first is this. The red cannon thing just appeared on top of me. A bit of warning over where this thing decided to plonk itself would have really been appreciated. As mentioned earlier, PegLeg 2 is similar to the first. Maxoff picked this one up and published it as a retail title. It takes a bit of getting used to when coming directly from the first, as everything on the screen behaves a little bit differently, including the player's ship. Gone are the goomas, and in its place are shields that can be triggered at the player's will, and bombs which provide the player with a way to destroy things below them. For me, being able to use shields was more of an offensive thing than defense, as my reaction times just aren't good enough to activate them when I realise something is about to hit me. Instead, I used them whenever there was a build-up of particularly troublesome enemies, and then bulldozed them. One major improvement over the last game is having a sound effect when the shield is about to run out. I really appreciated that. The supply crates seem to contain power-ups more often than in the previous game, at the expense of gun upgrades, so die a few times and it can really set the Mark Z's offensive capabilities back quite a bit. They're also a fair degree harder to collect. Hostile projectiles are everywhere. These explode into bullets, as do these, and even more cascade out of these rotating bow tie things like a waterfall. The one upside to this is that as well as destroying the supply crates, they also destroy whatever else they bump into, making a game of PegLeg 2 even crazier looking than the first. It's only after watching footage back that I can appreciate the busyness of the visuals here, as all I was really looking at while playing was where the ship was going. Thanks to the inertia mechanic, taking one's eye off where the ship is going is one of the biggest risks a player can take. PegLeg 2 doesn't have an in-game story card or hostile list like the first, although being retail, I'm not ruling out the possibility of there being something to this effect in the manual, so goodness knows if any of the hostiles have names. The green CDs and walking pebbles start the game off easily enough, and are gradually joined by toxic cluster bombs, big red spiky balls, loaded springs that are best dealt with using bombs, and creepy little walking eyeballs. I wouldn't say the roster was quite as zany as the first game, but it's nice that most of these are their own unique thing and not a rehash of what came before it. I don't however think that I would have wanted to buy this back in the day if I'd already had the first. I might as well mention, there's also a PegLeg for kids. This was included on a compilation disc from Macsoft called Kids Arcade Pack, and it's the best game on it. It's basically PegLeg 2 but played at the slowest setting and with the shields and bombs removed to simplify things. The one visual difference seems to be the shape of the walking pebbles. It's a nice idea really, and makes the game accessible to a younger audience. But there's no reason for anyone over the age of 7 or so to play this, instead of the other two, so its use is pretty limited. Overall, I'd say the PegLegs are titles that anyone with an old Mac should give a shot. They're fun to play and have enough going on to differentiate themselves from similar space shooters. One last thing I'll mention is just how different it feels to play at various resolutions. Up the play area and the player gets more room to manoeuvre, but more things to manoeuvre around. A nice touch. So that'll do then for this edition of YyeYyears MG. Hit me up with your high scores if you get them. It would be fun to have a target to beat. Mine are in the description, alongside the game's download links. More old Mac games can be found throughout the rest of my channel, so do give it a peruse if you find this sort of thing interesting. Thanks for watching then, and see you next time.